Today, I'm gonna reveal to you 6 hacks for taking your short films to award-winning status. If you're a filmmaker who's looking to level up your storytelling abilities today, this video is for you. And if you happen to be a little skeptical on whether these 6 hacks actually work, in my next video, I'm going to break down how did award-winning filmmakers use these techniques to stand out among their competition. My name is Hannah Thomas. I'm a future filmmaker just like you, so let's get into this video. Hack number 1 is to draw inspiration from real-world conflict. Your primary focus as a storyteller should be to deeply resonate with your audience. This is what precisely can take an amateur story up to award-winning. According to even highly esteemed screenwriter Martin, actively collecting real-world anecdotes is a much better starting place than a story's premise. Most inexperienced screenwriters start with the story's premise and get lost in fabricating unrelatable human conflict within their fictional world. Listen, no one said you couldn't steal stories from real life and then build a fictional world and characters around what you observe is actually happening. And when doing this, people will be much more likely to resonate with your story because it's 100% real and relatable. It's going to bring a certain authenticity to your story, which is going to make your film stand out above the others. As a person who's written dozens of stories and my fair share of bad ones, I promise you that most people out there are writing stories with an awesome premise, doing what is cool or what would look epic, but not you, because you are determined to not make the same mistakes and level up your storytelling skills, which means taking a hard look in the mirror and thinking about what people actually care about. And it turns out that is the real hardships that they are facing. Now, this doesn't mean you have to give up the film ideas that you're most passionate about. Instead, I encourage you to aim to integrate real conflict into your current ideas. Hack number 2 is to try telling stories with no dialogue. I know this might sound kind of crazy, but right now there are college professors out there who require their film students to make a silent film. Yes, in 2023, make a silent film as their first assignment, as opposed to, your typical film with sound and dialogue between characters. And this is precisely because they want to challenge their new film students to show instead of tell. The number 1 mistake amateur filmmakers make is having too many explanations embedded in the character dialogue. Showing the important emotions, events, actions, and reactions is necessary for a much more impactful and engaging story. If you want your stories to wow judges and audience alike in a competition, then what I encourage you to try telling a story with no dialogue at all. This will force you to think critically about how to use other film elements such as color, set pieces, actions, reactions, and more to tell a complete story. And if you're hard-headed like me and are positive you need all that dialogue, I encourage you to write at least 1 draft without it. This will still challenge you to see what you can do without dialogue and allow you to see what is absolutely necessary. Afterwards, you can always add back in what was absolutely needed into your screenplay, but I bet it will surprise you how little was needed after all. Hack number 3 is to use story circles to structure your screenplay. If you've been studying screenwriting for a while now, then you surely have heard about story structure. Now, this is loved and hated by filmmakers everywhere, but we have the most notable being Blake Snyder's Save the Cat and Sid Field's Paradigm. Now, integrating a whole 3-act structure into your short films can be overwhelming. Also, their beats are so plot focused that I would argue they are not the best tool to be using in the earliest stages of writing. To tell a story that resonates with your audiences, You need your story to be driven by your characters, specifically by your characters' needs, wants, and beliefs. So I highly suggest you try a new popular technique, story circles, from Dan Harmon, and use this to help structure your film. They will keep your plot character driven. Also, they're pretty much a simplified version of the hero's journey, so it'll save you a lot of headache because it's easier to digest and understand and implement into your film in the long run. Unfortunately, I don't have time in this video to break down and explain exactly what story circles look like and how to use them, so make sure you check out my next video where I use all these techniques and show how they are found in award-winning films already. Hack number 4 is to make sure you develop your character arc using belief, want, and need. Good stories are character driven, so the last thing you want is an uninteresting, static, unchanging main protagonist that we, the audience members, have to follow. You need to make sure that your stories contain characters with fully developed character arcs, because this will give your characters the complexity and depth they need. So what even is a character arc? The character arc is defined as the gradual change in beliefs our character goes through over the course of the story. The character arc is built around 3 key traits: their false belief, their want, and their inner need. Most commonly at the beginning of our story, our character believes a lie, their false belief. Then later they face adversity, which causes them to question their false belief. When writing, you need to clearly define the false belief that your character has and think about how this belief will be challenged and changed over the course of your film. Your character must also want something. This want, as you see with a story circle, will propel the story forward. This should be based on your character's false belief and should somehow conflict with what your character actually truly needs. In well-developed stories, characters often have to sacrifice what they want to get what they actually need. Sometimes the story ends with that sacrifice and the character never gets what they want, but they did get what they needed. Other times, the character's sacrifice leads them to getting what they wanted all along. In the next video, we're going to break down how character arcs are found in award-winning films and kind of explain what this process looks like in even more depth. Hack number 5 is to stop making likable characters. Amateur filmmakers worry a lot about making their characters likable, but the problem is they misunderstand what it means to actually make a character likable in the first place. For instance, you do not need to write a character who only ever does the right thing. I mean, everyone at some point in their life has probably made a questionable decision because we all see the world a little differently, and sometimes we want something for a greater noble cause. It is not entertaining, nor does it create compelling drama to watch a character make only good decisions or make bad decisions with no justifiable cause. As a storyteller, you should prioritize making your character's motives and intentions understandable to the audience. This is why so many stories provide backstories or spend so much time allowing the audience to get to know the main protagonist. And number 6, probably one of the most important hacks for leveling up your filmmaking ability, make sure you intentionally establish setups and payoffs. There is nothing more annoying in a story than the dreaded Deus Ex Machina. This is a plot device where a seemingly unresolvable conflict is suddenly resolved by an unlikely occurrence. Amateur filmmakers will say this decision is to shock the audience, but it can't wow them because often it is too convenient, and sometimes it doesn't even logically operate within the world that they've designed. You will spend a large portion of your film developing the conflict, so it can feel extremely dissatisfying to have everything easily resolved. To avoid this form of sloppy and dissatisfying storytelling, it is critical to use setups and payoffs. When used correctly, your story gains important logic and has necessary limits. Russian playwright and author Anton Chekhov described setup and payoffs beautifully with his gun analogy. According to Chekhov, if a gun is placed in a scene in Act 1, then that gun must be fired by Act 3. The gun being placed is the setup, and then the gun being fired is the payoff. Award-winning storytellers are constantly worrying about setting up their payoffs, because the last thing they want is their audience asking, where on earth did that gun come from? In your film, make sure you intentionally establish setups and payoffs. The best setups don't feel like setup at all in the moment, but do in a retrospect. So by the time of the payoff, your audience should be able to recognize, hey, this actually was building up to this payoff. This setup was intentional. If a setup is too obvious, the audience will predict something in the ending, which is something you never want. But remember, if you're like, I don't want to use setup because I'm worried it's going to make things too obvious, your payoffs might not make sense, and they will be unrewarding. If your setup is just right, everything will fall into place in the end, and your audience will be shocked. So those are my 6 hacks for better storytelling to try to help you take your films to award-winning status. And I hope you check out my next video where you can learn even more and see the examples of how award-winning filmmakers are using these techniques in their films. Regardless of wherever the world takes you next, it doesn't matter. Remember to never stop creating, because guys, it's our turn to make it happen.
And there it is, guys. That one moment in the film is so important. That is setup. Hack number 6, when you intentionally use setups to help sell your payoffs, her placing that green leaf is set up for a moment that we'll see later in the film. If she never placed that green leaf, the moment later in the film would not make sense to the audience.